Hello, love. It's Nina Kovner with Passion Squared, and welcome back to the podcast. We were off last week because, well, I made a very big step in my recovery, my healing from the depression and complex grief and trauma I've been experiencing since late 2019. And it was a big move. It was a big step. And that's what we're going to talk about today because we're all making big steps. And big steps aren't necessarily like literally big steps. For some of you, a big step may be just waking up, getting out of bed, saying yes to something that scares the fuck out of you. Those are all big steps. And I'm a big fan of celebrating every single step. This decision, however, was big for many reasons. And so I'm going to tell you a little story. A few months ago, I got a text from David Thurston of Danger Jones, who's a friend of mine. David and Alexis have been friends of mine for years. And he said, let's catch up. How you doing? And I'm like, oh, great. I'd love to catch up. So we jump on a call and we're catching up. And catching up with me the last few years has not been the most joyful process because things have not been great for me personally. And while I'm all about healthy boundaries and I do not TMI, I'm honest and I share what's been going on. And so as we're kind of catching up, one of the last things I said is, I'm not traveling. And, I don't know how much I'll ever travel again. Now, for context, Passion Squared is an online company. It's been an online company since 2012. However, every now and again, I will venture out to an event, a gathering with clients, etc. So David said, well, right after I said, I don't think I'm probably ever going to be traveling again, David said, well, actually, I have a question. We have an event happening in LA in March for the launch of Danger Jones. And I would love for you to come be a speaker at that event. And my heart sank. Like it sank in so many different ways because I'm like, wait, what? Like that was like the last thing I was expecting. And I not only did my heart sink, but I just felt just stunned because I didn't say yes. And because I trust David and because we are friends, I said, to be honest, I'm not sure. Can I have a few days to think about this? And of course, because he's amazing and gracious, he said, of course. So we get off the phone and I'm like, ugh. My feelings were all over the place. I don't want to go. I don't want to get on a plane. I don't want to leave my house. I don't want to leave Portland. I don't want to leave Courage. I am not ready. I'm so out of practice. This is such an incredible group of people and such an important event for David and Alexis and for all the attendees. And I just didn't feel ready. And I sat on it. I sat on it for a couple days. And one morning I woke up and I was journaling. And I'm like, you know what? Such a big focus of mine has been on, of course, healing and recovery of these very personally tumultuous last few years. And if I don't say yes, I may never, ever say yes again. There are these moments in our life that are defining, right? Defining moments. And while I still have no desire to change Passion Squared's business model and begin traveling the world again because I did that for 25 years. I also know that in order to heal, in order to break through this incredibly dark chapter, there are things that I'm going to need to do that are going to be incredibly uncomfortable and scary and painful and terrifying. And so I'm like, fuck it. And I texted him and I said, yes. Shaking, nervous, unsure, all of those things, all of those human things. I said yes. Now, again, for more context, the last time I was on an airplane was a year ago. It was a year ago, March. And I had a pretty intense knee injury that was at that time still undiagnosed. All I knew is I was in excruciating pain and I was getting to the point where I couldn't walk. And I walked into the airport March 2022 and I stopped. I froze. I literally could not take the next step. And thank goodness there was a person there with a wheelchair that was able to wheel me to my gates, to my plane, off the plane, and to the person that was coming to get me. And through that entire month of March, I had at least a couple trips, personal trips. And I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't walk. So there were a lot of things that were scaring me about that yes that I said. However, once I said yes, then it was like, okay, it's go time. And now I have a focus, and that focus is on getting stronger, having faith, and doing everything I can do to prepare myself for this trip. These are things you do every day. Preparing yourself literally for the day, preparing yourself to open a business, preparing yourself to have a difficult conversation, preparing yourself to, there's so many things that you do all day, every day that are very similar to this. Now, how did it go? Wow. Well, there's so many things I want to share with you today. And so I'm going to first talk about a new trauma that was unlocked. And it wasn't unlocked last week. It started to unlock over the last 2 years. And that is one of my incredible fear of public speaking, ironically, which is something I have done since 1988. I have given talks in rooms of 5,000. I have given talks in rooms of 5. I have given talks around the world. I have given talks online since 2012, workshops, lives, reels, TikToks, classes, webinars. I've been doing this my whole life. So how could this be a source of trauma? I started to think about the feelings that I have when I have said yes to giving talks in real life or classes in the past. And at that same time, I have been dealing with an old trauma that bubbled up in 2021 as I was kind of going through it. I had done a podcast in 2021 that I was returning to the treatment center that I went to in 2007. And I did that in May 2021. I went to a complex grief and trauma 5-day intensive. And one of the processes of the treatment center that I went to is doing trauma timelines. And since I had already been there in 2007, had already done my life trauma timeline. So what the counselor, the therapist said in 2021 was start your trauma timeline from after you left in 2007. And I'm like, cool, not much. Like everything's been great. LOL. And one of the traumas that came up for me was some really, really difficult, traumatic situations and experiences that happened in my career. And a couple of those were centered around public speaking and giving talks. One of them was on 9/11, and I was in Texas at a meeting. This was a small one, 12 people in the room. And I had a presentation to give. And it was in the morning. And the television was on in the conference room. And we were all sitting there, just frozen, silent, watching this attack on America. And then they turned off the TV and said, all right, Nina, we're ready for you. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Now, that may not seem like a big deal to you, but for me, in that moment, it was terrifying. And one of the things that we have to understand or remember about trauma is many times trauma can be exasperated by minimizing the situation, right? And this is a story of minimizing. Like, no, our country wasn't just attacked 5 minutes ago. It's time for you to talk about shampoo, because that's fucking important. I mean, wild. The second thing that came to mind as I was going through all this was I was on a plane. We were in Canada, and we were taking my boss's private plane, which we used a lot, which sometimes people ask me if I miss my old career, and I miss the people. I mean, that will be a forever answer. But I also miss flying private, if I'm going to be honest. Anyways, so we were flying from Canada to San Francisco. I was giving a talk. It was probably for a group of a couple hundred. And, you know, we were prepared. It wasn't a long flight, and I was ready. I was dressed and, you know, makeup and prepared to give the presentation. And we're flying, and all of a sudden, the plane drops. The plane drops. The plane dropped. The oxygen mask came down, and I was pretty sure we were going to crash. And that was it. It was over. It was all going to be over. And we froze. We all froze. I mean, if you've ever been in this situation where you lose a significant amount of altitude quickly, you freeze. Like you get lightheaded. It's a wild thing. Anyways, we leveled out. We didn't crash. Obviously, I'm still here. The plane leveled out, and the pilot said that the windshield had cracked, the outer windshield. So they dropped the plane intentionally. Of course, they didn't have time to tell us they were dropping the plane, but they dropped the plane intentionally for there to be less pressure so the second windshield wouldn't break. If the second windshield broke, we'd be done, right? So, gosh, talking about this is wild. So I don't know what elevation we were at, maybe 10,000, 15,000 feet versus before maybe 30 or 40. We flew all the way to San Francisco at that low elevation and got off the plane. And again, okay, Nina, we're ready for you. Now, mind you, I feel like an hour earlier, I thought I was going to die in a plane crash, like literally an hour earlier. But instead, no, that actually didn't really happen. Nothing happened. Everything's fine. It's time for you to go give your presentation. Those situations, those are just a couple, but those situations can be traumatic. And for me, they were, in addition to so many other things as it related to public speaking that I minimized, that I numbed, that I disassociated from, that I forgot. And the lesson here, the reason I'm sharing this with you is that when it comes to trauma, it's always inside us, right? It's always part of us, but it may take decades for it to appear. That's been my experience over my 56 years. It wasn't until 2007 that it really, my life trauma really bubbled up for me, which is what landed me in treatment to begin with. So, and I've been good. I've been good for a good decade. However, it's always going to be something, right? Something's always going to come back. And so when that happens, I want you to know that that's completely natural. It's completely normal. And it's just part of life. It's just part of the journey. So recognizing that didn't necessarily help me per se in my presentation last week. However, it did give me a sense of explanation as to why I was so incredibly anxious and stressed out about something I've been doing for over 3 decades. So not having traveled in a while, not, physically not being able to walk last time I traveled, discovering this new trauma that I need to work on, process, work through. Then came something I never anticipated, which definitely had an impact on me once I got to Los Angeles. And that was returning to Los Angeles. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I lived there for 52 years. It was my home. It was my life. It was my business. It was everything. And I had not returned back to Los Angeles since I lost so many of my family and loved ones over the last 3 years. I didn't think about that. And when I stepped off the plane in Burbank, which if you've ever flown into Burbank, it's there's stairs, right? There's no jetways. You just get out of the plane door and you're outside. You're right there. You're outside. You see everything. And the minute I stepped out of the plane door, I stood there and I cried. I didn't expect that at all. I didn't even think about that. And it threw me. It really threw me. Because not only was I really walking into this a little unsure, to say the least, excited, grateful, determined, hopeful, but also unsure, anxious, stressed. That really threw me. I've had all the therapies. Most of you know that. I've talked openly about it for over a decade. All the treatments, all the books, all the journaling, all the gratitude lists, all the nature, all the things. Trauma is fucking brutal. And trauma is something we need to walk through. We need to feel. We need to process. And there is no clean, black and white, neat little anything that helps us do that. Yes, there, of course, is treatment, my treatment center. Shout out to my treatment center, who has now saved my life twice, the Meadows. Thank you, in Wickenburg, Arizona. But sometimes, and I don't know any other way to say this, but sometimes we have to rip off the Band Aid. And that's what I did. Last week was a big fucking rip off the Band Aid moment. I did not feel ready. And in fact, I probably wasn't ready. And as I was sharing with our A School members last week, what is ready? Like, what does that even mean? I don't believe we're ever going to think we're ready for anything. And you can look back at the businesses that you've opened and the milestones that you've achieved and the boulders that you've moved through and over. I'm pretty sure you never felt ready. Really, really ready to do any of those things. It's so cliche. The leap in the net will appear, blah, 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 blah. You know, we're all different and we all have different processes. However, in my experience, I truly believe that sometimes we just got to fucking do it. And it's really, really, really hard. And you are really, really, really capable of doing the most incredible things. So the question now becomes, for me, and I think this process will be helpful for you, and again, why I'm sharing all of this with you today, is what would I have done differently? Looking back over when I first had that conversation with David, then when I said yes, what would I have done differently? Well, I mean, in my little fairy tale utopian world, I would have made sure that the last few months had been just happy and joyous and beautiful and awesome and void of stress and angst and disappointment and all of that. Well, that's not reality, right? So none of that happened. It's been a rough few months, personally. Just life, right? Family stuff and stuff. We all have stuff. What would I have done differently, though? There are a few things I would have done differently. And again, this is growth. This is how we learn. So I would have brought a friend. And I thought about bringing a friend. But I just got so wrapped up in, I got this, I can do this, that it just kind of slipped away, right? So I definitely would have brought a friend because currently I am training Courage to be a service dog for me. And ideally, Courage would have been with me on this trip. However, I was not planning on taking any trips, not anytime soon. So Courage had never been on a plane. And a business trip is not the time for Courage to have his first plane trip. So that was obviously very stressful because I haven't been away from Courage. And he literally is my everything. Courage, my dog, if you don't know. I would have brought a friend. I would have arrived to Los Angeles a day earlier. I would have arrived a day earlier had I been aware of the emotional stress being in that city was going to cause. Again, that caught me off guard. I had not thought about that. I would have arrived a day earlier, tried to catch a healing session with my healer, and maybe even gotten a massage. Just a little bit more time to ground myself. I would have brought more protein bars because I'm all about keeping your blood sugar level. It's a big part of creating awesome presentations, our course for educators and leaders that we launched last year. There's a lot of ways to ground yourself before a talk, before a presentation. And one of those is keeping those blood sugar levels even, and whatever that looks like for you. For me, it's pretty consistently eating protein in particular. I couldn't eat because I had such an upset stomach. Protein bars would have been, extra protein bars would have been a huge help. I would have done that. I would have taken a little test trip, maybe just a little flight, maybe from Portland to Seattle, just to kind of get my bearings, to build some confidence around, can I walk? Like, can I walk to the gate? Am I going to be okay? Because this knee injury, I still have it a year later. And then the most important lesson of what I would have done differently, and I want you to hear this: nothing. Nothing. Because I could have done all the things in the world to prepare myself, which I did to prepare myself, extra prepare. However, some of those things may have kept me from walking into and experiencing and feeling not only the traumas, but also the joys. The literal head to body joy that came from overcoming, that came from doing something I didn't think I could do, that came from hugging and catching up with people I cared deeply about, some people who I hadn't seen in years. So I would have done nothing different. The whole reason I'm sharing this story with you today is I know that I am not alone in my struggles in life, struggles in business, feelings, experiences, especially coming out of these last few years. And so I want you to take this story, I want you to take these lessons. I want you to think about the ones that fit your current situation and experience, and then discard the ones that don't. The journey's messy. It is not linear. It's not black and white. And one of the reasons we get so hung up and we get so frustrated and we get so overwhelmed and our confidence takes a hit and our worth gets beat up is because of these ideas, these expectations, these thoughts that everyone else really has their fucking shit together and I'm the only one who's feeling some kind of way. Love, you are not the only one. The last thing I want to share is it just happens to be March 20th as I'm recording this episode. It is the first day of spring. It is a time of hope, a time of renewal, a time for growth, a time for clearing spaces, a time for joy. The morning of my talk last week, I had set an alarm, which I don't often do because I just wake up. Because I love the morning. Mornings are my quiet time. They're the me time, my journaling time. And that morning I set an alarm because I wanted to be sure I was awake. And the song on my alarm is Here Comes the Sun from the Beatles. What a perfect song for spring. What a perfect song for coming out of these last few years. What a beautiful, beautiful song for having hope and for feeling joy again. That's what I want for you. And that's what I want for me. I'm so grateful for you. I'm so proud of you, and I am inspired by you every single day. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for your compassion and grace. Here comes the sun. Thank you so much for listening. Have the most beautiful day. Bye.